Before I tell you how I survived the night my husband and his family tried to murder me, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to hear is a story about betrayal, survival, and second chances you won't believe. And trust me, you'll want to see how justice found its way back. My name is Clara Mitchell, and 3 years ago, I thought I had my life all figured out. I had a thriving design business, a downtown loft, and a father who could move mountains. Robert Mitchell, yes, that Robert Mitchell, the construction tycoon who built half of Chicago's skyline from the ground up. To the world, he was powerful. To me, he was distant, the kind of father who showed love by writing checks and giving advice like it was scripture. Clara, he'd always say, never mistake charm for character. Yeah. I wish I'd listened. Because then Nathan Cole walked into my life, flashing that movie star smile, and I fell, hard. It wasn't supposed to happen. I met him at a charity fundraiser I designed. He was there selling pharmaceutical partnerships, the kind of guy who could talk his way into a locked vault. He offered to help me carry boxes that night, and by the time we were done, he'd asked for my number. He texted the next morning. Then the next. Then every day after that. And look, I'll be honest, he made me feel seen in a way no one ever had. Not as Robert Mitchell's daughter, not as the designer from the magazines, just me. Clara. The woman with paint under her nails and dreams that didn't fit inside her father's shadow. Nathan was effortless. Smooth. He remembered every little thing, my favorite coffee order, the song I hummed while sketching, even the way I always checked light fixtures first when I entered a room. He said it made me unique. Funny thing, now I realize it made me easy to read. 6 months later, he proposed. I said yes before he even finished the question. It was fast, wild, and I thought that was love. I didn't care that my father hated him. He'd had him investigated, of course. Found debts, old gambling issues, relationships that ended with mysteriously borrowed money. When he told me, I accused him of being controlling. You don't get to buy my happiness, Dad, I'd shouted. He said something I'll never forget, then don't sell it to someone who can't afford it. That was the last conversation we had for nearly 2 years. I married Nathan without my father there. It was small, beautiful, intimate. Just friends, a few coworkers, and Nathan's mother, Linda, a woman who smiled like she was sizing me up for a coffin. I brushed it off, because Nathan said she was just traditional. But even then, there was something in her eyes. Something cold. The first year of marriage was, okay. Not great, not terrible. We laughed, traveled, posted perfect photos online. But behind those smiles, something started shifting. It was little things at first. Nathan questioned why I took so many clients. You don't need to work that hard, he'd say. Let me take care of you. Then he'd accidentally forget to tell me about dinner plans with his coworkers or change our joint bank passwords. I told myself it was stress. Marriage stress, work stress, whatever kind of stress made excuses sound reasonable. But slowly, my world got smaller. Friends stopped calling. He'd always have a reason why we couldn't go out. You work too much. You're tired. They don't really care about you. It was subtle, like he was trimming branches off a tree, one by one, until all that was left was him. Still, I stayed. Because that's what you do when you think love is supposed to fix things. Then came the day I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't planned. Honestly, it scared me at first. But when I told Nathan, his face lit up like Christmas. He lifted me, kissed me, said I'd made him the happiest man alive. I believed him. God, I wanted to believe him. For a few weeks, it actually felt good again. He'd rub my back when I got sick, talk about baby names, even cook dinner sometimes. Then his mother moved in. Linda arrived one Sunday afternoon with 3 suitcases and a look that said, I'm here to stay. She claimed she just wanted to help, but somehow that meant taking over everything, how I ate, what I wore, how I decorated the nursery. She criticized my work, called me too modern, said the baby needed a traditional family home. Nathan told me to let her be. She just cares, he'd say. Don't make everything a fight. So I didn't. I tried to play the good wife, the patient daughter-in-law. But inside, I felt like a stranger in my own house. Then one morning, when I was 7 months along, I found the messages. Nathan's phone was buzzing non-stop while he showered. Normally, I ignored it. But something, call it instinct, made me look. The screen lit up with a text from someone named Emily. I can't stop thinking about last night. I wish I could say I didn't open it. But I did. And once I did, I couldn't stop. Hundreds of messages. Photos. Plans. Jokes. All at my expense. They called me the wife, like I was just an obstacle. I scrolled until my hands went numb. Then I saw it. Once the policy clears, we'll be set for life. Policy? That word stuck like glass in my throat. I dug deeper. There it was. A $5 million life insurance policy in my name. Signed. Dated 6 months earlier. Only I hadn't signed anything. That night, I confronted him. He denied it all, of course. Said I was hormonal, paranoid, losing touch. He even deleted the messages right in front of me, like erasing them would make me doubt my own sanity. When I threatened to leave, he broke down. Cried. Begged. Said Emily meant nothing, that he loved me, that the policy was just a precaution. I wanted to believe him, even when every cell in my body screamed run. But that night, after he fell asleep, I did something I hadn't done in nearly 2 years. I called my father. He picked up on the first ring. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said, Dad. I think I'm in trouble. There was a pause, and then his voice, steady, sharp, protective, filled the line. Tell me everything. I told him about the affair, the policy, the lies. He didn't say I told you so. He didn't lecture. He just said, Clara, listen to me. Document everything. Don't let them know you suspect anything. And when that baby comes, call me immediately. I promised. Though I didn't understand why he sounded so certain something worse was coming. The weeks that followed felt like walking through fog. Nathan was suddenly affectionate again, overly so. Flowers, dinners, long talks about starting fresh. His mother hovered constantly, monitoring what I ate, how long I slept, even my phone use. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. I began hiding notes in my design portfolio, little reminders of what I'd seen, what I knew. Screenshots, copies, anything that could prove what was happening. I didn't know what I was building evidence for, but something in me knew I might need it. By my 8th month, I had a plan. I'd leave right after the baby was born. I'd find an apartment, get back to work, maybe even reach out to my father for help rebuilding. I just needed to survive delivery. But life had other plans. 2 weeks before my due date, I woke at 3 a.m. with contractions so sharp they stole my breath. Nathan sprang into action, too quickly. He'd been waiting for this. He called his mother, packed a bag, and insisted we go to a private hospital he'd arranged in advance. That was the first red flag. I hadn't chosen that hospital. My doctor wasn't even affiliated with it. But the pain was overwhelming. I didn't argue. I just prayed it would be over soon. The hospital looked like a boutique hotel, soft lighting, sleek decor, nurses who called me Mrs. Cole with forced smiles. They hooked me to monitors, set up oxygen, and said everything looked fine. Nathan held my hand, smiling like the perfect husband. Linda stood in the corner, her expression unreadable. The contractions grew worse. I begged for my doctor, but they said she was unavailable. Instead, they brought in someone I'd never met. He assured me it would all be okay. That's when Nathan's phone buzzed. He stepped outside, said it was a work call. When he came back, he wasn't alone. He walked in with Emily. Yes, that Emily. His mistress. The woman who joked about my weight, my face, my marriage. She smiled like she belonged there. Like this was normal. I tried to ask what she was doing here, but a contraction hit so hard I couldn't speak. Nathan said she'd come to support him. Can you imagine? I was in labor, and he wanted his girlfriend there for support. The nurse hesitated, asked if I was okay with it. Nathan answered for me. She's family. And that's when something in me cracked. Every warning, every instinct I'd buried came rushing back. My father's voice, calm but urgent, echoed in my mind, document everything, stay alert. I watched as Linda stood near the door, blocking it slightly. Emily moved closer, pretending to fix my blanket. Nathan lingered near the foot of the bed, silent. Too silent. The air felt wrong. Heavy. The way it does before a storm. I looked at the oxygen tube running from the tank to my mask. My lifeline. And for one fleeting second, I caught the way Emily glanced at it. Then at Nathan. Then back at me. My heart started to pound, not from labor, but from fear. Something was about to happen. I didn't know what, but I could feel it in my bones. And that's where everything truly began, the night I realized love could kill you if you ignored the signs. Because what came next would test every instinct I'd ever buried, every lesson my father ever tried to teach me. And if he hadn't followed his own, I wouldn't be alive to tell you this story today. So stay tuned. Because you're not going to believe how close death came that night, or who stepped in when everyone else turned away. The hours that followed blurred together in waves of pain, panic, and pretense. The contractions were coming faster now, stronger, closer. Every breath felt like pulling air through water. I tried to focus on my baby's heartbeat on the monitor, a steady thump-thump that reminded me why I had to stay calm. But even as I listened, something inside me whispered, "You're not safe here, Clara." Nathan held my hand, but his grip wasn't comforting anymore. It was performative, tight, deliberate, like he was aware of the nurses watching. He'd lean close and murmur sweet things, but his eyes stayed cold, distant. And every time he glanced at Emily, my skin crawled. Emily stood near the window, arms folded, pretending to check her phone. She wore a soft pink cardigan, the kind people wear to look gentle. But her eyes, those didn't match. They flicked between me, the oxygen tank, and Nathan, over and over. Linda hovered by the door, blocking it just slightly, chatting politely whenever a nurse came in. To anyone else, it probably looked like a caring family waiting for a miracle. But I knew better. I could feel the tension radiating off them like heat. Something about the air in that room didn't feel like air. It felt like waiting. When the doctor came in again, he smiled too easily. "Everything's progressing nicely," he said, checking my chart. "We'll have this baby in your arms in no time." Then he left. And as soon as the door closed, I heard Linda say softly, "Good. We just need to be patient." She said it like someone waiting for the kettle to whistle. If you've ever had that moment, when every sense in your body lights up, when your intuition screams run but you physically can't, you'll know exactly what I felt then. My chest tightened, my breath caught, and I gripped the bed rail so hard my knuckles turned white. I kept replaying my father's voice in my head. Document everything. But I didn't even have my phone anymore. Nathan had taken it for safekeeping. My heart rate spiked, and the monitor beside me beeped faster. A nurse rushed in, adjusted the oxygen flow, and asked if I was okay. I wanted to scream no, but Nathan answered for me again. "She's fine. Just anxious." He smiled at the nurse with that practiced charm, and she nodded politely, believing him. They always did. When she left, he turned back to me, his voice dropping low. "Don't make a scene, Clara. You're gonna stress the baby." Stress the baby. The irony almost made me laugh. The pain worsened. I focused on breathing, on staying alert. Because even in agony, a part of me knew, something was about to go terribly wrong. Around 5 a.m., things escalated. The baby's heart rate started to dip again. The nurse adjusted my oxygen, said it would help stabilize everything. I could feel the air cooling my lungs, the relief washing through me. For a brief moment, I let myself believe maybe I'd imagined it all. Maybe I really was just hormonal. Then Nathan's phone buzzed again. He stepped outside the room to answer, leaving his mother and Emily behind. That's when Linda leaned close to Emily and whispered, "Just 5 more minutes." Emily nodded, her gaze settling on the oxygen tube. "You ever feel time slow down? Like the world moves frame by frame?" That's what it was like. My heart thudded loud enough to drown out the monitor. Every cell in my body screamed, "Do not let her touch that tube." But before I could say a word, another contraction hit, sharp, blinding. I doubled over, gasping. Emily stepped forward, all fake concern. "Let me adjust that for you," she said softly. Her hand brushed the line connecting the mask to the oxygen source. Something changed. The air pressure shifted. It wasn't flowing right anymore. I tried to suck in air, but it came slow, shallow. My vision started to shimmer around the edges. Panic hit like a wave. I reached for the call button, but Linda was faster. She plucked it off the bed and set it on the counter, just out of reach. "Relax," she said calmly. "You'll hurt the baby if you fight it." I tried to scream. Nothing came out. My throat locked. The monitor beside me beeped faster, then slower. My oxygen levels were dropping. The baby's heart rate was dropping. Emily looked at the monitor and whispered, "Almost there." And then Linda said it, her voice barely above a breath, "5 more minutes, and it'll look natural." I swear to you, I will never forget that line. That was the moment I understood I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was being murdered, slowly, methodically, by people who smiled while they did it. The edges of my vision turned black. I could see shapes moving but couldn't make out faces. I tried to lift my arm, but it felt like I was underwater. My mind screamed my father's name. Over and over. "Dad, please. Please, Dad." And then everything went silent. I don't know how long I was out. Seconds, maybe. But when I came to, the room was chaos. The door had burst open so violently it slammed into the wall. And there he was. My father. Robert Mitchell, the man I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years, stood in the doorway like an avenging storm. Security guards and nurses flooded in behind him. His face was white with rage, eyes locked on the 3 people frozen in shock. "Get away from my daughter," he thundered. His voice didn't shake. It boomed. He pushed past them and reached me in 2 strides, ripping the oxygen line from the mask and reconnecting it properly. Air rushed back into my lungs like life itself. I gasped, choked, then sobbed. He slammed his hand on the emergency button. "She's crashing," he shouted. Nurses swarmed in, checking vitals, yelling instructions. One of them shouted, "Baby's in distress. We need to move now." Linda, Emily, and Nathan stood frozen at the door. My father turned toward them, and I swear, for a moment, I thought he might actually kill them with his bare hands. "Don't you move," he said, his voice low and deadly. "Not one step." Security blocked the exit. The next minutes were a blur of medical voices, machines, and bright lights. The doctor returned, panic on his face. They stabilized my breathing, adjusted monitors, injected something into my fore. I was barely conscious, but I could feel my father's hand gripping mine. "I've got you," he kept saying. "You're safe now, Clara. I've got you." I clung to that voice. Because that voice meant I wasn't alone anymore. I drifted in and out as they delivered my baby. There was shouting, then crying, tiny, beautiful, alive. The sound of that cry cut through every ounce of fear I'd been drowning in. They placed her on my chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe again. I named her Hope right there in that hospital bed. Because that's what she was, proof that even in the darkest moments, light still breaks through. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Police arrived. Statements were taken. Surveillance footage pulled. Everything, the affair, the insurance policy, the forged documents, came spilling out like poison from an old wound. Nathan tried to play innocent. Said it was a misunderstanding. Emily sobbed, insisting she didn't know what Linda was planning. Linda said nothing, just sat in the corner with her hands folded, like she was waiting for a funeral to end. My father stayed beside me the entire time. He explained everything later, when I was strong enough to listen. He'd had a bad feeling that night. Said he'd woken up around 2:30 a.m. with this gut certainty something was wrong. He called the investigator he'd hired months ago to quietly keep an eye on me. When he couldn't reach him, he grabbed his car keys and drove straight to the hospital. When he got there, he saw through the delivery room window, Linda standing in front of the door, Emily by my bed, Nathan doing nothing. He didn't think. He acted. And that instinct, that split-second decision, saved my life. Later, he told me, Clara, money doesn't make a man powerful. The courage to act when it matters does. Those words still stay with me. The police took Nathan, Emily, and Linda away that morning. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged insurance paperwork, the text messages, the hospital footage, it all told one story: this was planned. Coldly, cruelly, deliberately planned. The next day, I filed for divorce. I didn't even need to think about it. When the papers were signed weeks later, it felt like exhaling for the first time in years. My father moved me and the baby into his estate for recovery. He hired nurses, security, everything. I wanted to protest, to tell him I could handle it. But honestly, I couldn't. Not yet. I needed him. And for once, I wasn't too proud to admit it. At night, when Hope slept in her crib beside me, I'd stare at her tiny chest rising and falling and think, we made it. Somehow, against every odd, we made it. But survival doesn't just happen. It's a choice. 100 tiny ones. Like trusting your instincts when everyone calls you crazy. Like making that one phone call to the person you swore you'd never need again. Like holding on when the world tells you to let go. So if you're listening to this and you're stuck in a situation that feels wrong, if something in your gut keeps whispering this isn't love, please, listen. Don't wait for a miracle to prove it. Be your own. Because if my father hadn't followed his gut, I wouldn't be here. And Hope, she wouldn't even exist. That night didn't just give me a daughter. It gave me a second chance. And this story? It's far from over. Because while the law caught up to them, the healing, that part took much longer. And that's where the next chapter begins. If you thought it ended when her father burst through that hospital door, think again. That night was only the beginning of a storm that would shake Clara's entire world. Because justice, real justice, takes time. And healing? That's an even longer road. The morning after the arrests, the hospital was eerily quiet. The same walls that had echoed with chaos and screaming the night before now held only the soft hum of machines and the occasional footsteps of nurses. Clara woke to sunlight spilling across her sheets and the rhythmic breathing of her newborn daughter beside her. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Everything felt hazy, like waking from a nightmare that somehow still clung to the air. Then she saw her father, Thomas, sitting by her bedside. The man who had once built skyscrapers now sat slumped forward in a hospital chair, his hand still gripping hers. He'd stayed there all night, guarding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. When her eyes fluttered open, he looked up and smiled, tired, relieved, emotional in a way she'd never seen before. "Hey, baby girl," he said softly. Clara's throat tightened. "Dad." He squeezed her hand. "You don't have to say anything. You're safe now. That's all that matters." And that's when it hit her. Safe. She was alive. Her baby was alive. Kevin, the man she thought she loved, the man she almost died for, was sitting in a police cell somewhere. It was over. Except it wasn't. Because once the physical wounds start to heal, the emotional ones begin to surface. And those cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. The detectives came later that morning. They were polite but direct. Questions about everything: how long had she known about the affair, when did she last speak to Kevin's mother, whether she'd signed the insurance papers. Clara answered through tears, voice shaking but steady enough to tell the truth. Every word she spoke felt like another layer of betrayal peeled away. Her father sat beside her the whole time. Every time she faltered, his hand was there, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. When the detectives left, he finally said what had been sitting on his tongue for years. "I should have protected you better." Clara shook her head. "No, Dad. I didn't listen. I thought you were trying to control me." Thomas looked away, jaw tight. "You're my daughter. I'd burn down the world to keep you safe. But I can't protect you from pride. That's something we both had too much of." That moment broke something open between them. For the first time since she'd stormed out of his mansion 2 years earlier, they talked, really talked. About how love can turn into manipulation, how control hides behind charm, how pride can cost you the people who truly care. Her father wasn't perfect. He admitted that. He'd been too harsh, too judgmental, too used to winning every argument. But Clara wasn't blameless either. She'd been too determined to prove him wrong to see the truth staring her in the face. That's one of the biggest lessons in life: sometimes, being right isn't worth losing the people who love you. A few days later, the story hit the news. Tech billionaire's daughter survives alleged murder plot by husband and mistress. The headlines were everywhere: tabloids, talk shows, podcasts. Reporters camped outside the hospital. Everyone wanted a piece of her tragedy. But Clara stayed silent. She didn't want fame. She wanted peace. The truth was enough. Her lawyer handled everything with quiet precision. The life insurance documents were forgeries. Kevin's debts were deep, over $500,000 owed to loan sharks and illegal gamblers. He'd been desperate, and desperate people make monsters of themselves. The evidence was airtight. The DA promised a strong case. Thomas funded the best legal team money could buy, not to control the outcome, but to make sure his daughter's story couldn't be twisted again. At night, when the hospital lights dimmed and the noise faded, Clara would hold her daughter close and whisper, "We made it, baby. We made it." She named her little girl Faith, because that's what she'd lost and found all over again. The weeks that followed were hard. Healing isn't pretty. It's messy and slow. The nightmares came first: visions of Ashley's cold eyes, Diane's whisper, Kevin's silence. She'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, her father rushing into the room before she even called. Sometimes he'd sit beside her for hours, humming softly like he used to when she was a child. One morning, he found her in the nursery, staring at Faith in her crib. "You know," he said, "when your mom was pregnant with you, I was terrified too. Thought I'd mess everything up. But the moment I saw you, I knew, love changes a man. Real love makes you softer, not weaker." Clara smiled faintly. "I think I'm still learning what real love looks like." He put an arm around her shoulders. "Then you're already halfway there. That's one of those quiet truths people don't talk about enough. Love isn't supposed to isolate you. It's supposed to expand your world, not shrink it. If someone starts cutting off your friends, your family, your voice, that's not love. That's control. And control always comes dressed as care in the beginning." By the time Clara was discharged, the world outside had already moved on to the next scandal. But for her, the real story was just beginning. She moved into her father's lake house, peaceful, private, surrounded by tall pines and open skies. She needed space to breathe, to rebuild, to remember who she was before Kevin tried to erase her. At night, she'd sit by the fire with Faith sleeping on her chest and write letters she never sent. To Kevin. To Diane. Even to Ashley. She didn't write to forgive them. She wrote to free herself. Because forgiveness isn't for the guilty, it's for the living. It's how you stop the poison from spreading. Her therapist told her something that stuck: you didn't survive by luck, Clara. You survived because you listened, too late maybe, but you still listened. And next time, you'll hear the warning sooner. And that's when Clara decided her story wouldn't end in fear. She wanted to use what happened to her to help others. Women in abusive relationships. People who ignore red flags out of love or hope or denial. She started small, online support groups, sharing her experience anonymously. But her words hit home. Messages poured in. Strangers thanking her for giving them courage to leave, to see clearly, to believe they deserved better. Clara began to heal, not just for herself, but for them too. Because survival isn't just about breathing, it's about rebuilding. It's about choosing life again and again, even when your heart still aches. And through it all, her father stood by her. Not as the powerful mogul anymore, but as a man who'd almost lost the most precious thing he had, and learned what truly matters. One night, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset reflect off the lake, he said, "You know what the hardest part was? Not being able to save you from yourself. But you did that on your own. I'm proud of you." Clara looked at him, tears shining in her eyes. "No, Dad. You saved me. You always did." He smiled. "Maybe. But now, it's your turn to save someone else." 3 months after the attack, the case went to trial. The courthouse was packed: reporters, cameras, curious strangers who'd followed her story online. They called her the billionaire's daughter who survived her husband's murder plot, but that title never sat right with her. She didn't want to be a victim, and she sure didn't want to be known for who her father was. She wanted people to see her as who she really was: a woman who fought back, a mother who refused to die. When she stepped into the courtroom for the first time, her knees trembled. Not because she was afraid, but because she was angry. The kind of anger that comes from realizing how much you've lost and how close you came to losing everything else. Kevin sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, hair cut short, face pale. For a second, she saw the man she once fell in love with, the smile, the charm, the man who made her feel safe. And then she remembered the oxygen mask, the pain, the betrayal. That version of him was gone. Maybe he'd never really existed. Ashley wouldn't meet her eyes. Diane just stared straight ahead, her face blank like she was the one who'd been wronged. It was surreal, sitting there looking at the people who'd planned her death. And still, Clara sat tall. Because she wasn't the woman they'd tried to break anymore. The prosecutor laid everything out: the forged signatures, the debts, the text messages about making it look natural. The surveillance footage from the hospital hallway showing Ashley walking in, Diane blocking the door, Kevin just standing there. Each piece of evidence was a dagger, but it also stitched her back together, proof that she hadn't imagined any of it. Proof that the darkness really had been as deep as she remembered. Her father was there every single day. Same seat, same steady presence. The press whispered about how cold he looked, but Clara knew better. That wasn't cold, that was restraint. If he could have, Thomas would have torn the world apart to make sure those three never saw daylight again. On the third day of trial, Clara took the stand. She wasn't sure she could do it, relive that night, describe the betrayal, the fear, the moment her world went black. But she did. Her voice shook, yes, but it didn't break. She told them about every manipulation, every controlling moment, every red flag she ignored. She described the feeling of that oxygen tube tightening, the sound of her mother-in-law's whisper, 5 more minutes and it'll look natural. You could hear a pin drop. Even the judge looked shaken. And then, when the defense tried to paint her husband as stressed, as financially pressured, as if that excused anything, Clara just looked straight at Kevin and said, "You had a choice. And you chose greed over love." That single sentence silenced the room. The trial lasted 2 weeks. 2 long, exhausting, emotionally draining weeks. But when the verdict came, it was worth every tear. Guilty. On all counts. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, forgery. She started going to therapy regularly. Learned about trauma, control, and self-worth. It wasn't easy, confronting the truth about why she'd ignored the signs. But it was necessary. You didn't fail because you loved him, her therapist said one day. You failed because you loved him more than you loved yourself. But you don't do that anymore, do you? Clara smiled. No. I don't. Her father became her biggest supporter, but this time, not as a protector, as a partner. He helped her relaunch her interior design business, not with money, but with introductions, mentorship, quiet encouragement. She built a team, got clients, started creating again. For the first time in a long time, she felt like Clara, not someone's wife, not someone's daughter, but herself. The story spread again, this time for a different reason. People weren't talking about the murder plot anymore, they were talking about her strength. Her interviews weren't about revenge or wealth, they were about resilience. About warning signs, survival, and healing. She started speaking at women's conferences, sharing her story to help others spot manipulation before it turns deadly. Her voice carried, raw and honest. If you have to shrink yourself to be loved, she told one crowd, that's not love. That's control wearing a pretty face. Faith was her biggest motivation. She wanted her daughter to grow up seeing strength not as anger, but as peace, the quiet kind that comes from surviving and still choosing to love. One night, after a long day of work, Clara found her father on the porch, watching the sunset. He looked older, softer. You know, he said, I used to think protecting you meant controlling everything around you. But now I realize, real protection comes from teaching someone how to protect themselves. She smiled. Guess you finally did that, huh? He chuckled. Guess we both learned. There was a long pause. The sky turned golden pink, Faith laughed somewhere inside, and Clara said, Dad, I think I'm ready. For what? To stop being afraid. To live again. That's the thing about trauma, it doesn't disappear overnight. It doesn't vanish when the verdict's read or the cameras leave. But you can choose not to let it define you. Every day, Clara woke up and chose peace over pain, purpose over bitterness. She started a foundation for survivors of domestic and financial abuse, helping women rebuild their lives, start businesses, find safe housing. It grew fast. Her story inspired donations, volunteers, entire communities. But she stayed humble. Every time someone thanked her, she'd just smile and say, Don't thank me. Thank the part of you that decided to keep going. And if you take nothing else from her story, take this. It's never too late to leave. It's never too late to start over. And it's never too late to forgive yourself for not seeing the truth sooner. Clara didn't just survive. She transformed. Because survival means you lived through it. But transformation means you made it mean something. Because justice might close a chapter, but healing? Healing writes a whole new book. A year had passed since the verdict. The world had moved on, headlines had faded, but Clara's life, it was only just beginning to bloom again. The lake house she once moved into for peace had become a home filled with laughter, crayons on the walls, and baby giggles echoing through the halls. The nightmares still came sometimes, but they didn't own her anymore. Faith was walking now, wild curls, bright eyes, always on the move. She'd inherited her mother's stubborn streak and her grandfather's confidence, a mix that made Thomas laugh every time she toddled over to boss him around. She's got your fire, he'd say, and Clara would smile. That fire used to scare her. Now it kept her warm. One quiet morning, she made coffee, stepped onto the porch, and just breathed. The air smelled like pine and possibility. She looked out at the water and thought about everything that had brought her here, the mistakes, the pain, the moments that nearly ended her life. And for the first time, she didn't feel broken. She felt grateful. Her phone buzzed. A message from her foundation director. Another survivor wanted to share her story online, inspired by Clara's journey. She typed back instantly, "Tell her I'll call her myself." Because that's who she'd become, not the woman who needed saving, but the woman who reached back into the fire to pull others out. Later that week, she was invited to speak at a national women's conference in Chicago. Thousands of people in the audience, cameras rolling, lights bright. She walked on stage wearing a simple cream dress, elegant, calm, grounded. No flash, no pretense. Just truth. She told them everything, not the sensational version the media ran with, but the real story. The fear, the shame, the way she ignored the signs because love blinded her. The loneliness of realizing the person you trusted most was your enemy. The strength it took to rebuild. The courage it takes to forgive. "I used to think survival was the end goal," she said, her voice steady over the silence. "But it's not. Survival is the first step. The real victory is choosing joy again, even after someone tried to take it from you. Because when you can smile after everything you've been through, you've already won." The crowd rose to their feet. Tears, applause, hope. People didn't see a victim on that stage, they saw resilience wrapped in grace. And maybe that's the lesson in all this. Pain doesn't have to make you bitter. It can make you better. After the event, a young woman approached her backstage, trembling. She said, "I saw your story online. I was in something like that too. I thought no one would believe me. But you made me believe in myself again." Clara hugged her, no cameras, no speeches, just two survivors standing in the same truth. And she whispered, "You already did the hardest part, you left." That night, Clara and her father walked through downtown Chicago, Faith asleep in her stroller, city lights glowing all around them. Thomas looked at her and said, "You know, I used to think strength meant never needing anyone. But watching you, I realize strength means knowing when to ask for help." Clara smiled. "Guess we both learned that lesson the hard way." He nodded, then added softly, "Your mom would have been proud." That one sentence undid her. She leaned her head against his shoulder, tears falling quietly, not from sadness, but from peace. In the months that followed, her foundation grew even bigger. She partnered with shelters, set up grants for women starting over, and launched a mentorship program called Second Sunrise. The tagline read, "Because every ending is just a new beginning waiting to be written." Sometimes she'd film short messages for her YouTube audience, the same one that once heard her first story, the one that had cried, shared, commented. She'd talk directly to them, sitting on that same porch, sunlight on her face, Faith playing in the background. "Hey everyone," she'd begin, soft smile, warm tone. "If you're watching this and you're in a place that feels impossible, I need you to remember something. You are not weak for loving the wrong person. You're human. And being human means we fall, we trust, we hope, and sometimes we get hurt. But that hurt doesn't define you. What defines you is getting back up, taking your life back, and refusing to let anyone else write your story. You deserve peace, you deserve safety, and you deserve love that doesn't make you small. Don't ever forget that." She'd end with a laugh, maybe holding Faith on her lap, saying, "And if I can rebuild from rock bottom, so can you." Her videos reached millions. Some came for the story, but most stayed for the message. Clara had turned her pain into purpose. Her name became a symbol, not of tragedy, but transformation. A few years later, she visited the prison to sign final divorce papers. Kevin wanted to see her one last time. Against her lawyer's advice, she agreed. Not for him, for herself. Closure isn't always about forgiveness, sometimes it's about confirming you've outgrown the person who broke you. When she walked into that sterile visiting room, Kevin looked older, defeated, the charm long gone. "You look different," he said. Clara smiled politely. "I am different." He tried to apologize, to justify, to twist it like he always did. But she didn't need any of it. She just looked at him and said, "You know what the difference between us is? You thought power came from control. I learned power comes from peace." Then she stood, signed the papers, and walked away. That was the last time she ever looked back. Years later, Faith asked about her father. Clara told her the truth, not the gruesome details, but the lesson. Your father made choices that hurt people. But we choose differently. We choose kindness. We choose healing. We choose love. Because that's the real legacy she wanted to leave behind, not fear, not hate, but wisdom. And if there's one thing Clara's story teaches, it's this. Don't ignore the quiet voice inside you. It's not paranoia, it's protection. Don't mistake attention for love. And don't let anyone make you feel like you're too much or not enough. The right people will never ask you to shrink. Her father passed away when Faith was 7. Peacefully, at home, surrounded by love. At his funeral, Clara gave the eulogy. She said, "My father didn't save me because he was powerful. He saved me because he listened to his heart. He reminded me that family isn't about perfection, it's about showing up when it matters most. And he taught me that no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back if love leads the way." Afterward, she and Faith went down to the lake, the same place she once sat broken and afraid. They scattered wildflowers on the water, watched them drift away, and Clara whispered, "Thank you, Dad. For everything." And in that quiet, golden light, she felt him there, not as a memory, but as strength. So, if you're listening to this and you've ever been in a dark place, thinking it's too late to turn things around, don't believe that lie. You are one decision away from changing your entire story. One phone call away from safety. One act of courage away from freedom. Clara did it. You can too. And if this story reminded you of your own strength, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs it, and remember, your past may have shaped you, but it doesn't define you. You define you. Thank you for listening. Stay safe. Stay strong. And never forget, even after the darkest nights, there's always a second sunrise.